and the glory forever. Amen. The former president, Jimmy Carter, gave a wonderful interview recently. I think maybe a year ago, actually, now. And I'll paraphrase this one part of it in this conversation. He said, "We can't avoid having faith. We being people, humanity. We cannot avoid having faith. All of us. We all have it. Even when we were tiny babies, even then, we had faith. We had faith in our parents. As we grew up, we learned to have some kind of faith in ourselves, to have faith in our closest friends, to have faith in the things that we cherish, things like faith in the truth, faith in education, faith in our country, faith in love. We cannot avoid having faith." And I think his point is a really good one. I really like it. And it challenged me a bit to think about that because I didn't agree with him immediately. And it's especially something for us to talk about, us Christian folk, because the argument that he is making, this we do not have any choice but to have faith, we cannot avoid having faith, his argument is squarely sitting in non-religious territory. He isn't talking about faith in God or faith through religion or spirituality. His point is plainly that faith is a human thing. It is a part of us in the same way vision, smell, taste, arms, legs, skin, bone. It is a part of being human. And that we express it, feel it, and chase it in all things, in all areas of life. And that within our human experience, faith in religion and spirituality happens to be just one expression of it. And it is a unique standpoint, I think, because when the faith conversation happens, it pretty much exclusively is one about spiritual and religious faith. If you were to say that there was a faithful person, a person of faith, you would be talking about their spiritual life, their religious life, and not too much more. The only exception to this I can think of is referring to perhaps faithfulness in a romantic relationship. If you were to say that someone had no faith, that they were not a person of faith, you would be talking about their spiritual life, that they had no spiritual life or spiritual community or spiritual practice. Not that they didn't hold true to things like Jimmy Carter was talking about, things like love, faith, justice, and truth. And yet, here, thinking about faith as more than just a religious thing, that it is grounded in a lived out experience, is critical because it's important for us to consider this, because for better or for worse, Christianity, we have a flag pretty firmly planted in this word faith. And for better or for worse, that has influenced our relationship with the world, the rest of the world. A world that, as many have observed and many would argue and many are saying, is rapidly losing faith. The decline of religion and religious life has been going on pretty steadily since about a decade after the anomalous bump in church membership after World War II. This is old news. I don't need to explain this to anyone here. But it's important for us to keep in the back of our mind in this conversation. And before we go any further, I'd like to say up front that the topic of church decline, of the rapid secularization of the world, is not something that scares me. And I don't think it should scare you. It's not something that makes me anxious or nervous, and I don't think it should necessarily make you anxious or nervous. As far as I am concerned, it would be like being fearful of the night on a sunny day, or cursing a rainstorm that you are watching roll in toward you. I would much rather spend my time lighting lanterns and putting on my raincoat than bemoan or lament something that I have no control over. And in the realm of faith, the thing that I do not have control over, nor do any of you have control over, is the discernment and the working of another person's human heart. Because it is the heart, the conscience, that primarily drives people from religion. It is not the mind, it is not the brain, though the brain crowd is much louder, and I would, perhaps in a petty way, say feels a compulsion to constantly speak. It is not the majority. Because in fact, the vast majority of people who are leaving church, they are following their hearts. They are not following their heads. They are not following their logic. There is a terrible internal reckoning that happens, one that comes out of a careful and loving process of bringing up truly well-rounded spiritual people that goes on. That moment of faith crisis, of questions, of having questions, of needing answers. We all have gone through it. At some point in our lives, either a little whisper or a roaring question shouted from the mountaintops. We have experienced this, every single person. And you will experience it again, I'm sorry to say. Now, this happens in a couple different ways. One is the personal experience that the observation of faith, having faith, being a person of faith, means one thing and one thing exclusively, and that is that having faith means believing the right thing or believing the right doctrine. And that oftentimes those who are strictest to the letter of the doctrine, who believe the right thing, don't always seem to have their actions in alignment with it. That is challenging. The second is that though an individual might agree with much of what doctrine says and history says, because it is not identical to doctrine, or it is not identical to what is felt by the person sitting next to them into their pew, then they have no place. And so they must leave and find a place where their heart is identical. It's a really awful either or. An either or where on one side we are all hypocrites, and on the other side is the gnawing anxiety that I might actually be a hypocrite and I need to do something about it. This again comes from a very incomplete notion that having faith is just simply one thing, that it is believing the right thing, believing the right doctrine, and believing it right along with everyone else, that there is no deviation, that there is no, but what about, that there is no, but one time, no, that it is black and white. It is funny, I think, to support this, to say that in a religion like ours, that 2 + 2 always equals 4, when one of our doctrines says that 1 is 3 and 3 is 1. It's challenging. As it appears in the moment of reflection in the bulletin, one of our theologians, Marcus Borg, contends that there are in fact 4 components to faith, and belief, as I have been describing it, is just one of those things. I'd like to review them just quickly for a minute, because the first after this faith as belief is faith as trust. He references the other philosopher Kierkegaard, saying that faith as trust is like floating in 70,000 fathoms of water. If you struggle, if you tense up and you thrash about, you will sink. But if you relax and trust the power of the water, you will indeed float. For the example, think about this. Peter walked on water until when? Until his fear overpowered his trust. How does faith as trust manifest in your life, in your words and your actions and your decisions? Then there is faith as loyalty, or faith as commitment. And commitment to what? Well, in our sphere, our Christian sphere, we're talking about commitment to the teachings of Jesus, the love your neighbor and the like. And then letting those teachings be the lighthouses that guide and direct our choices and our actions, and atoning for when we break that commitment, for speaking honestly to ourselves, to God, and each other when we haven't quite done what we want. Now, I would like to be clear that this is not commitment to religion. It is commitment to teaching, commitment to guidance. In the words of Barbara Brown Taylor, if pressed, I will always choose my neighbor because Jesus never commanded me to love my religion. Then lastly, there is faith as vision, or simply faith as a way of seeing the world, which Borg describes is so important because how you see the world, how you understand the world, determines how you will respond to the world. If you believe that people are inherently deceitful or sinful, sometimes evil too, that they're trying to make you falter, trying to get one over on you, then you will see the world generally as a threat. If you believe that people are inherently good, or at least desiring to do good, you will see a world of possibility. One of those sends you out into the world to help others. One of those causes you to circle the wagons every time there is trouble. And I explain all of this. I say all of these things not as a lecture, not to subtly talk about something that I'm not saying directly. I'm not doing that. This is not a finger wag. This is not me standing up here in this pulpit with my degree and all shaking a finger because I know you all. I know some of you better than others, I will admit, but in my 7 years here, I have come to learn a little bit about what it takes to worship in this community. The things that you must hold true somewhere inside of you in order to be here. I know how your faith governs your actions, how with each day and decision it is set before you to do a little bit better, to be a little more honest, a little more good than the day before. And I have seen the successes and I have heard about some of the failures, and ultimately I know still the waking up each day and choosing again to do a little bit better. I've watched and heard and experienced your faith in more than just the doctrines of this church. I have seen it at work in hands, in words, and in hopes. None of this is any kind of a do better mandate. All that this is, in a world that appears to be losing its faith, where every decision or non-decision in any and every congregation carries the nervous worry of a coffin nail in this world, what this simply is simply the encouragement to calm down, to love it, to love this life and this faith and this work, to love what this religion is doing within your hearts and how it takes an idea and then turns it into hope and then turns it into flesh in action, your flesh, your hands in action in the world. To let the love shine through. Feel the way that faith stretches into all parts of you, not just into your head, but then transmits throughout everything, eyes, body, and deeply into your heart, to cherish being a person of faith that lives in honesty of your life and this world. To let that shine and to take the time to not apologize for it, to not hide it, but to honor it, to love it as you would love any treasure. Because when you do that, when you let that shine, when we allow the power of this faith into all parts of our lives, putting what we believe next to how we trust, next to what we are committed to, next to how Christ tells us to see the world, something happens. And it's not that our brains start to shine, it is that our hearts start to, luminously so, beautifully so, tenderly so, confidently so. And that the shining cannot be ignored, which is so critically important, I think, because, as I said earlier, hearts are exactly what guide us in the first place. And I believe for many of you, it is what brought you here today, this morning, maybe last week, the week before that, the decade before that, however long it has been. You have been following it. So continue and cherish it and honor it and love it and give it its due. Amen.